StartupHakk, we love to train software developers and build custom software solutions. So I do a lot of work as a fractional CTO with over a decade of executive leadership and a solid 25 years in software development. I've mastered the art of transforming technology, team, and products. So today I'm going to dive into something that's a little more unscripted than some of my other stuff. I generally like to have a pretty decent script for what I'm talking about. But I've done a lot of layoff reports recently following Cisco's layoff, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that this morning to kind of kick it off. We'll talk about Cisco's layoff, we've talked about Intel's recent layoff, and then we've been talking a lot about the job markets because I've been through a lot of different job markets and this is definitely a unique one. So I'm going a lot more off the cuff and unscripted today than I normally do. Hopefully this works. This is a little bit of an experiment. So let's dive in today because we're going to dive into this and go into a lot of this layoff report, what some of y'all's responses are. And I want to thank y'all for giving me these great detailed responses. Some of these responses I've gotten from people have just been huge reports and I really appreciate it. It's great material. So I want to make sure that I'm sharing that with you, and we're going to dive into some of the latest layoffs and things this morning. So let's jump right in. All right, so for very first starters, Cisco, and I'm going to do a deeper dive on the Cisco layoff this afternoon, this evening. But Cisco laid off, let me switch screens here. Cisco laid off is cutting 7% of its workforce and reports earnings and revenue that beat for a quarter. So Cisco reported its third straight quarter of declining revenue, wrapping up its first full fiscal year drop since 2020. So during the pandemic, if you remember, Cisco was just killing it. It was with Intel and all these guys that literally you couldn't get stuff fast enough. And it's because people were having to shift networks all over the place to try to deal with people working at home, right? It went from everything in the office to suddenly everything was remote and VPN and everybody was scrambling for networking equipment, laptops you literally couldn't buy. And so you remember that during the pandemic. And so there was definitely a high that Cisco rode kind of through the pandemic. Now their pandemic ride went a little bit longer because then it all shifted back to RTO, right? And so as we had this RTO shift, then people had to stop. So they've kind of been able to ride the COVID bumps, so to speak, a lot better. Now, but they've now seen a full year of fiscal drop. Now, again, I think Cisco's one of these, and this is going to be my overarching report, so kind of you're getting the spoiler alert. I think Cisco's another one of these mammoth behemoths like Intel that just don't know how to innovate anymore. I think they're too big. I think they are just really cumbersome. I know people that work there, and they just say it's impossible to get anything done. So anyways, they've seen their first full fiscal year drop. Company said it's cutting 7% of its global workforce. Now notice that this is global workforce, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this actually today in one of the reports about what we're seeing overall with the global, right? So this isn't just US, right? So keep that in mind because that's a huge part of this to do too. Earnings and revenues topped analyst estimates. So everybody knew Cisco was going to suck. They just didn't suck as bad as they thought they were going to, and they're still going to cut because of it. So this isn't going to necessarily impact US, and I think as you dig into the numbers, and I'm going to dig into this a little bit more today when I dig into their earnings calls and what they said, I think it's actually going to hit more overseas than it actually is going to hit locally. Prior to Wednesday's close, the stock market was down 10% this year, while the NASDAQ was up about 15%. So Cisco shares popped in extended trading on Wednesday after the network said, and this is one of the things that kind of just really gripe me about the market of today. Man, 10 years ago, if you said you were doing a 7% layoff, your stock would have just cratered because everybody would have assumed that means you sucked. Now everybody's like, oh, they're being smart, and now I just kind of hate it. There's no loyalty left in corporations, and the market just feeds this, unfortunately. So unfortunately, CEOs who get compensated based on stock are incentivized to cut employees. Now, there's a tough balance there because if your company's bloated, like I think Cisco is, they probably do need to cut. It just kind of sucks that overall this is how that goes. Earnings 87 cents per share adjusted versus 85 expected. So they came in with 87 cents per share after the adjustment, and they were only expecting 85. So that's actually better than they thought. but they're still losing revenue, right? Cisco said it's filing, it's implementing a restructuring plan that will result in $1 billion in pre-tax charges to financial results that will allow it to invest in key growth opportunities and drive more efficiencies in the business. Of course, got to say that word efficiencies if you want your stock to move in the stock market, because otherwise that's not going to happen, right? Company said $7 million to $800 million of charges will be recognized in the current quarter. It's a whole bunch of accounting fun. So again, I'm going to go into a further deep dive of this afternoon, but this is kind of a good precursor. Jake Leone particularly came in with a huge comment, and his comments were so big that he actually started to, like, I had to break it down to like 4 comments. It was like this massive report. So what I'm going to show on the screen here is going to actually be me copying and pasting it out of his comments. So that I can show y'all it and go work with this. So, and I'm going to kind of go through some of his stuff really high, some of it I'm going to go really quick and he said it's okay. Like he said, sure, please break it down, share your research for or against anything I write. So again, I appreciate this, love this. Again, number one thing you can do, like and subscribe. That's really helping me out a ton. Second thing here is make sure that you are commenting. I love when I get comments, both live as well as later. I answer all of them myself. And so just, I really do appreciate this. So anyways, and I'm going to kind of touch on all these things that he talks about here. So let's kind of dive in here a little bit. I'm going to try to zoom this in a little bit here so we can see this a little bit better. So he says, I have never in my life seen such a dead tech market. I don't have a connection in tech that can get you a job. If you don't have a connection in tech that can get you a job, forget tech and find a new profession. Now, I'm definitely going to go against that just a little bit. I think that's a little extreme. And so, again, I understand the sentiment, and a lot of people are kind of feeling this, but let's be honest. The tech heyday we've been pretty spoiled as developers. And look, I'm pointing at myself too. We're pretty spoiled as developers. We're prima donnas. We love to get what we want, and we've gotten away with it for a long time. I think the market has caught up with enough labor that we're not able to do that anymore. I think ChatGPT is enabling, all AI is enabling developers to be more efficient. And I'm not saying that it's like anybody off the street can grab something and go deploy a major project. Far from it. But I think that, like, find a new profession, I think that's a bit extreme. As we've talked about before, the average developer makes over 2.5 times the average U.S. worker. It's the only profession that comes even remotely close to this is healthcare, and healthcare is a very demanding, very, very, very demanding, and it's fulfilling. Don't get me wrong. I'm not hating on healthcare workers at all. Definitely appreciate all of our healthcare workers, but I'm a little spoiled. I sit on my butt in this chair all day, and I get paid for what I know up here, right? And so go find a new profession. It's a little stretch. I still think there's a lot left in this market. So one study statistic I think comes from the Witt research. Tech salaries have not decreased, and this points to heavy sandbagging and throwing off the disconnected. I agree. Salaries have not decreased; they have stabilized, and that's really my big point here that I keep trying to come back to. Is tech salaries have stabilized, but we are so used to the hyper growth in tech salaries that we're so used to that hyper growth that we're like shocked because they've actually stabilized. And the problem is they hyper grew at a hyper speed during COVID that was at a rate that was totally unnatural. So we're feeling that correction now, and it sucks. Like, don't get me wrong, this market is rough. I do agree with you that I've never in my life seen such a dead tech market. Dead is a little stretch, but we're definitely feeling some of the correction. So I can tell you a dear friend who worked into it. He was particularly skilled, but he networked, kept to his job because he has awesome social skills. Statement that Intuit is throwing off unproductive coming from C-suite, and they do not like to decide. I agree with you. I think they just get into a case where it's like they look at every group and they're like, hey, we have to cut 10%. And one group may have had like all productive people, and they just had to like then drew out a hat. So who decides? Same people getting to make the job easy for some, impossible for others. Absolutely. Middle management. I totally agree with you here. So middle manager jumped in, was told by his boss, dude, you got to lay off 10% of his workforce. He's like, I have 5 amazing senior developers or something, right? And I'm totally spitballing this, right? But If five amazing senior developers, you got to lay off one of them. So I spent a year laid off, not bad because he has a family emergency. The people who left had told me, so I'm assuming from this that Jake here worked into it. So this is a pretty good inside source. I got an inside source, right? Love hearing that. Makes me sound really official. Because most of my stuff really honestly comes from the smell of the market. I work around technology and in technology a lot. I work between about 5-6 different companies, but I'm connected to probably 20 to 30 companies. So I'm pretty plugged in the tech market, but I don't really get a whole lot of insider source. It's more just like feelings and smells of the market. I'm working now completely remote. I think that's something to be said here too, right? Completely remote. A lot of developers are pushing for completely remote. A lot of people want to be completely remote. We've seen over and over and over again reports that show that developers particularly want to be remote. Again, we're prima donnas, man. Like, where am I right now? I'm sitting in my office at home making a YouTube video, right? Getting paid by YouTube to make YouTube videos, running teams of devs for other people to build awesome products, because that's what we do here at StartupHakk, is we build awesome products for people. And then teaching developers, right? I love it. I love what I do. So, completely remote, but at a significant drop in pay. And I think that's what it is. But significant drop in pay from what? From the peak of 2020, when we were in the heyday of COVID, 2021 following. I would still love to see, and again, I'm not asking Jake to go tell me what he makes here, but I'd still love to see a significant drop in pay compared to like what his buddy makes next door who just works a regular job. So I'm just kind of curious, right? I would say the answer is to institute broad salary reductions. Now, that's kind of funny because in one sense, he's kind of sounds like he's complaining about pay, but on the other side, he said, hey, we need to institute broad salary reductions. I kind of agree that we needed to institute broad salary reductions. How do we do that without coming back to your first point that we killed the tech market? That's kind of the big trillion-dollar question here, right? We definitely want to grow tech. There's no doubt. We want to grow tech. So why not? Well, people protect their own first, and the same impetuous. Yeah, absolutely. Like, we're definitely, and I am pro-capitalism. Let me just say that very bluntly. I'm pro-capitalism. I just am. So it's really tough to like be pro-capitalism with this next statement I'm going to make. I do think we have far too many large organizations with the CEOs lining their pockets. I think corporate greed is at an all-time high. And I worry about that. And how do we balance that with obviously not regulations? I'm definitely not a fan of the government trying to regulate this. This has to be done with free enterprise. But how do we do that? Why not? Well, people protect their own first. This wasn't the case 20 years ago. I just mentioned this at the beginning of this podcast, right? So what we're seeing is really unfortunate. Like, I talked about Cisco here, right? And did I close it? I talked about Cisco, that it's like, hey, we're going to do a 7% cut. And oh, by the way, shares are up 10%. You didn't see that 10 years ago. 10 years ago, if you were doing layoffs, your stock was going to get hammered. And somehow this, and then of course he said this magic word of efficiencies, right? Oh, but we're going to be efficient. So therefore it's okay that we're going to cut off, tons of people's livelihoods. Now, again, I get it. I'm pro-capitalism. So I get that you're going to have to make, growth. But the problem here is that companies got fat during COVID off free government money. Loans were virtually cheap, and now we have these bloated big companies, and we're seeing it as, oh my gosh, tech is crashing, okay? So the best possible way to get a job in tech, to get back in the tech market, is to reduce pay. Now, I agree with this, actually, and I've told tons of junior developers, because I talk to these junior developers, and like, wow, like I only have a year of experience, and I'm not getting $100,000 offers. You think? Right? Go get a job that's paying you 50, 60 grand a year and get some experience for a couple of years, right? Get into the industry. So I agree with you. I think we got to reduce pay on the individual level as well as on the whole. I think developers are making too much. And I know it's not probably going to sound like super popular, but the problem is we look out there and then we go to like levels.fyi and we go to these things and be like, oh, freak, I'm not making that. I'm getting underpaid. I'm leaving, right? Or we get disgruntled with our jobs, right? And some companies are quietly moving departments offshore. Now, I haven't seen this. So far, I actually have seen more of a swing away from it. So I'm actually very connected. Almost every dev team that I build up, I believe in a firm ratio where every dev team, dependent on the team, it totally depends on the team, But depending on the team, you're going to be somewhere between half to a third of the team should be offshore. But I take the offshore workers and I bring them into the teams and integrate them into my teams. It's part of my recipe, part of how we build amazing software at a good cost here at StartupHakk. Because we can find really good offshore talents. Some of my best developers are offshore developers, and they're amazing. They're even some of my best friends, right? Like I have really good friends that are working offshore. I don't see tons of stuff moving offshore right now, and I'm talking with these folks overseas, and they say the layoffs are happening twice as bad in India and Pakistan and Ukraine right now. Ukraine's been a mess since the war, but we won't go into that. But I don't see this. So I'm going to respectfully disagree with this one. I'm not seeing this. There is definitely, like, I think companies are figuring out we are a globalized economy now. So we are going to see more work with some offshore employees. But so my coworkers all worked 2 to 3 times harder last year. No kidding, that's what I was told by work phone. The whole department was laid off in December. This is what I think just is terrible about where we've gotten ourselves as a tech market right now. There's zero loyalty. You can work absolutely as hard as you want, and somebody up in the corporate ladder is going to look at a spreadsheet, the profit and loss, and be like, this whole department's a loss leader. I don't care that they just turned out one of our most amazing products. Cut it, right? And that is unfortunate. There is no loyalty to it. Unfortunately, I do believe in capitalism, and so at the same time, those are some hard decisions that have to be made. I'm not going to say whether they're right or wrong. I think companies like Intel, Cisco, possibly Intuit, that sounds like where my friend here is from. I don't. It's very possible that there's a lot of mishandling. That's totally possible. Yet they keep a lot of people who I know from direct knowledge are working 2 jobs, and that occurs because they're connected and can work half-time. Now, I just think this is straight up dishonest, and I'm not a fan of dishonesty in any form, ever. And I think an employee who's working 2 jobs should be absolutely fired. I just, as an employer, maybe I'm biased, but to me, this is just all kinds of dishonest. And I guess I'm just a man of principle. Call me a Boy Scout, but I don't ever think working 2 jobs is honest. And if that's happening, I think it should absolutely be immediate termination. That's my opinion. AI will not be a big generator of jobs. So I'm going to respectfully disagree with this one, right? Companies are wising up and waiting for third parties to offer solutions. This may be possible, but already I've been hired to help implement 2 different AI third-party stuff. So I know firsthand experience that I'm going to respectfully disagree with my friend Jake here, because it is going to generate jobs. It already is. Now, so what is the long term of it? I've talked about this as a good analogy as like Tesla and FSD. Tesla and FSD has been around for a long time. Is it perfect? Nope. Has Elon said it was going to be perfect like by the end of the year, like 4 times? Yeah, absolutely. Has it been perfect? Nope. And so we keep hearing it's coming. I think we're going to say the same thing, and don't hate me. I love my Tesla. Like I use FSD every day. So I think the point to this is I think AI was going to get to an 80%, and then it's going to need developers to fill that gap. And that's exactly where I've been hired to come in and help on 2 different projects now. So especially early on, but the exact time when the platform takes off is likely 5 years away. I think it's actually going to be really slow and incremental, is my guess here. We'll talk about this one here in a second. I think we're seeing it, and I think we're going to continue to see it. I think it's going to be a super slow growth. I think we saw the boom. I think we saw a dip. And now I think we're going to see this slow growth because every company wants to implement AI, but they don't know how because the tools are not 100% yet. They're like 60 to 70%, so that we need developers to help fill that gap. So US dollar is protected by a really dumb Fed right now. I could get into Fed for a long time, and I'm just waiting for the Fed. Recently now we've got presidential candidates talking about whether they should be, included in the Fed decision or not. Man, that's a big topic. There's a lot to unpack here. We may be. I could probably agree with this. I think there was a lot of dumb that happened all through COVID. Whether it was the Fed and the government, or the government replying to the Fed, or the Fed replying to the government, we could debate that for a long time. But so in U.S. dollars remain high compared to those in other countries. That's also true. And for every 1 developer in the U.S., there's 20 elsewhere who do the work for less. That is true, 100%. But the part I'm going to disagree with is, and I can show you actually a couple of reports, that India is actually laying off at a higher rate. Let me pull up that report really quick, just so I can show that here. India is actually laying off at a faster rate. Where is that? India is actually laying off at a faster rate than even the U.S. So everybody who says it's just overseas right now, it's tough. Now, we really don't have any choice but to do tariff foreign services. I'm gonna be curious to see how this works, because like I'm thinking about my business. I'm thinking how much that would actually harm my business. This would actually harm U.S. capitalism in some way. This would definitely impact my business. Software services are a primary export for certain countries. Same countries slap 400% tariffs on U.S. good. Further, they trade with Russia to help to keep a war going in Ukraine. Further drives inflation, the Fed interest rate, and slow down the U.S. economy. We're really on the verge of completely losing the software market to other countries. I'm not seeing this because, again, majority of my friends that I employ and work with and talk to out of India are saying that still, the hands down, the major supplier to this is the U.S. Now, I don't see a lot of really great successful projects that are just completely overshipped to India or to overseas. Sorry, this isn't anything against India. Like I said, I have tons of friends in India. I employ a lot of folks in India. This is not me knocking on them. But I just think that we still ultimately keep a percentage of that. And what I've found is that you always want to keep at least half your development staff in the U.S. and then integrate those in a team. Okay, so the U.S. has built some large semiconductor plants, but the owner are balking at firing them up. That's true, and that's Intel. Intel has built some huge ones on government grants and then never turned them on. I was talking to an insider on this one, and I told him I was going to call him an insider. I was talking to a guy who works at Intel, and he was telling me about this and how much of a flub this has been. And his whole take, and I'll probably do a whole nother live on this. His whole take is that every time, and I'm just going to say it, every time a Democrat touches Intel, something goes bad. Because the real reason isn't unskilled workers, it's high salaries and so barely profitable. I'm going to actually say it's high salaries at the top. And that's also what my friend at Intel is telling me, is he says that the number one problem with Intel is that the people at the top are just really the ones taking all the money. And so again, we need to incentivize using infrastructure we help create, right? I completely agree with this. I think Intel is going to be a recipe. I think we're going to study Intel for the next 10 years about this recipe of disaster and just idiocy. And the thing about it is my friends that work at Intel, who are all like middle management at Intel, totally agree with that statement, by the way. And again, we have to do this because the market manipulation of the Fed Reserve. I agree with this. The Fed is playing God. So at the end of the day, it is really frustrating. The tech market is absolutely an outcome of the Fed market playing God, or the Federal Reserve playing God. Now, the thing about the Federal Reserve playing God is they kind of had to because of some stupid moves from the government. So you pump that much money into, the government decides to pump that much money into the economy, the Fed's got to do something, right? And so is the Fed playing God? 100%, absolutely. Do they have to? They kind of got to do something. Otherwise, we would have seen some massive runaway inflation. So the reality is when you trade with other companies and increase overall productivity, and that generally lowers inflation such that your devaluation of currency, I'm not going to get into a whole lot of currency stuff right now just because I agree with him. I'm not disagreeing. But overall, the inflation works along runaway inflation, and he's right. Like, we cannot keep printing currency. I can't stress this enough. There is no good that comes from printing currency. Let natural consequences happen. Again, I believe in capitalism. I'm a firm believer in capitalism. If COVID had happened and we had lost some of these companies, it would have been tragic and that would have been unfortunate, but it would have been natural. What we're seeing now is this manipulation. We're seeing the effects of it already, and we're going to still see the effects. The U.S. economy right now, or the U.S. government, is almost paying entirely just on interest. Like, almost all the taxes for last year went just to interest. That's terrifying. If you don't protect the currency, you see it affect. You see net effect on salaries, 100%. Economists will say that comparative advantages over companies are fine, but the reality of the ground on the ground is that without a variety of jobs, people wind up being underutilized. For example, only taking gig jobs for work, finding work separately. I agree with that, but I'm telling you as the individual, take the gig job for right now rather than just sit around doing nothing. That's just really true for a developer. For keeping your skills honed, and even for your resume. I'm going to kind of jump through this because I agree with him, though, mostly. Go figure. It's a vicious cycle, and it's a shame the way the U.S. graduates are facing the reality in software. Totally agree. Completely agree with this. This is a shame, and it is because of this vicious cycle. Government pumps money in. Feds have to raise rates to lower inflation. We see, and I said from day one, as soon as the Fed started to raise rate, I said they're going to have to raise rates until we see jobs be hit. Otherwise, they can't affect inflation. And unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing. And I actually said that 2 years ago when we saw the first part of this. And so, there's a lot. We have got to stop pumping money into the economy. It artificially inflates it. And I'm a firm believer in capitalism. Let the things happen. So we need to do the following: tariffs, foreign software services. Again, this will be difficult. This will be really tricky, and I'm trying to figure some of that out. Extend the OPT 15% discount to give a higher foreign student. All aided employees. Could be a 3-year apprenticeship. I actually like apprenticeships. I'm a big fan of apprenticeships in a lot of ways. Companies are not looking to local markets for workers. That's kind of an interesting statement because the majority of the hiring I see. So in one sense, friend, you're saying here, well, you can only get a job if you know somebody. And then the other he says you're not looking at local markets. Kind of can't have it both ways. It's one or the other. Now, we know there's a case because we have seen 350,000 tech layoffs. It's really difficult to put numbers on a number of tech layoffs. I mean, maybe you can go show me a report that's saying 400,000 H-1B applications. Again, are all of those tech? Anyways. We know from DOJ versus Facebook 2020 and Apple 2023, the managers protect foreign workers from having to compete with local engineers. Go read the indictment. I did read this. I will probably do a live on this. It's very interesting, and I agree with you. It'll open your eyes to the reality of foreign managers protect foreign workers from better qualified local engineers applying for similar jobs. It's a harder path, I know. You could think of lower cost, desperate workers or like putting in a high performance fuel into the economy. Will mean a greater variety of opportunity and discrimination. I'm against discrimination in any form. I think hire the best person for the job, period, end of discussion. I agree with that. So the OPT program goes one further by giving a 50% tax discount to hire a foreign worker. I don't know a ton about this, so I'll be honest, I'm going to have to read into this. I do think there is a lot of damning stuff in this report you're talking about here, and a lot of it did come out, and it is actually, like, every piece of it that I've started to look at looks really bad. And so I agree with you that I think there's a lot of bad stuff in here. Now, he replied when I asked him if he minded if I use this in the podcast. And he said, I don't like being a downer all the time. It's a really positive idea. You can start a fix for all the other issues. If we can really talk loudly, national apprenticeship in tech. I agree with that. And I'm going to have a big announcement coming here in the next couple of weeks where we are working on some stuff to come up with some good apprenticeship opportunities. Now, again, this was super unscripted. I've actually had some good comments. Had some great, we're getting a lot of traffic to this one, which is awesome. I love doing these, and so let me know your thoughts down below. Here at StartupHakk, we love to train software developers. Like I said, we're gonna be working on an announcement around apprenticeships, and so make sure that if you're interested, shoot me a resume. But also, we love to build custom software for people. We're connected to the market. I help deploy teams. If you want to check that out, you can go to startuphakk.com/Spencer. And you can check out everything that we do there. But ultimately, we're going to continue to bring you some great news and things. I'm going to talk a little bit and dive into what's going on at Cisco this afternoon. So make sure you like and subscribe to the channel because that really does help. And we will catch you guys next time. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel because we bring you lots of great tutorials and tips that every developer should know. See you next time.